Welcome to this Friends of the Library event this evening. Our special welcome to our Friends of the Library, but also to all of you for coming out on a quite chilly night. Special welcome to Mike Stapleton and Professor Tiernan, who are my fellow panelists tonight. Griffith University colleagues, friends and visitors. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet this evening and pay my respects to the elders both past and present and to the spirit of the land. And I have the great pleasure of introducing our facilitator this evening, which means that I get out of having to do a lot of the housekeeping that normally sits with me. We're very fortunate to have Tim Cox here from the ABC 612 Brisbane, and if you're like me and an avid ABC listener, you'll know Tim's voice well. It's always a surprise when you meet these people because you have this image in your mind based on the voice. Tim's on weekends on 612 and on ABC Local Radio Queensland as well. Before that, he spent his time down in Tasmania. I'm sure he'll agree the Gold Coast's a better option, and I think I've actually heard him talking about the improvement in weather on the radio. He's covered everything from the Beaconsfield mine rescue down there to bushfires there and in Victoria and other national programs across day and night. He was ABC's Broadcaster of the Year in 2009, and in March 2011 he won the prestigious Keith Welsh Award for his outstanding contribution to journalism Tasmania. So we're very fortunate to have Tim here this evening to keep us all in order and on time, and he's going to be ruthless. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here tonight, particularly to those who were here very early, which is a very nice thing to see. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping. Phones on silent, please. And if I hear a mobile phone through the evening, it's only an hour and a half. I don't think hopefully no one will expire because you didn't get a call or what have you. I will be collecting that phone, and you can have it back for a $100 donation to, I haven't worked out who just yet. So phones on silent, particularly as we are recording tonight. My colleague over here in the middle, you can tell he's the film school student because he has a beard. And is Zachy Malla here yet? We had a bus bringing him in. I don't know if it's arrived or not. But so we will be recording it, and there is a Q&A session at the end of it. That's copyright, by the way. And you'll have the opportunity to ask a question, make a comment, etc., etc. There'll be microphones circulating for that part of things. So again, thanks in advance for having your phone off. Toilets are out to the right, around to the right past security, and then right again. So very conservative toilets, a lot of going to the right for the toilets. I believe, thank you very much, and I think that's all the housekeeping we have for tonight. Just very quickly, so I can get a sense of where we are collectively at. Put your hand up if you are absolutely 100% certain that you know what open data is. It's very interesting. All right. Just keep your hand up for a minute. Thank you. Just put your hand up if you are using open data in your work. So keep your hand up if you are. If you're not, put your hand down. Or if your arm's tired. Thank you. Great. What was that at the back? What are you doing? Census, thank you. What about you? Just drying the ink on that pen there, are you? Okay, excellent. So we've got some people here that are well and truly versed. So for those who are not entirely sure what open data is, do you have an open mind or an open heart on open data? Are you ready to do some learning on that, but also to be part of a conversation about it tonight? Particularly, of course, how it pertains to the public sector, which is why we are here. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. Our speakers will each have about 15 minutes, and then there'll be a good half hour or so for you to be part of the conversation as well. So great that you're here. Great that I'm going to shut up now and get on with it. Anyone listen to my show on Saturdays? Excellent. Don't be, but hopefully you would know Professor Tiernan, who is the fulcrum on which the show, it's a long show, she's the fulcrum on which that show pivots now, and she gives us such a terrific insight every week into affairs of state, particularly how they go in the long game, which I think is something that a lot of political analysis in electronic media really misses. So I'm very grateful to Anne for the contribution she makes to our show, but also to our better knowledge and better understanding of what they are doing across the river there. So Anne will get us underway, and then Linda, and then the nice man on the end who is quite well versed in data, open and otherwise. So would you please welcome, now I've actually got a very short title for everybody here, so I'll use that so that you are familiar with who they are. Professor Anne Tiernan, School of Government and International Relations, Griffith University. Please welcome Anne, thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and that is so not true that I'm the fulcrum. I'm wedged between consumer talkback and legal talkback, and I think all those people in the nursing home who can't reach the button have to sit through that. Listen, thanks, Linda, an outstanding leader here at Griffith and a key driver of data-led innovation and improvement at this institution. And it's great, Tim, to have you hosting the event this evening and to have you down our end of South Bank. I often say to the CEO of Brisbane City Council that it's nice to have them on our site here at South Bank. When they took back over the parklands, they think, there's actually a lot of energy and a lot of cooperation on this side of the river between the key knowledge institutions. And so it's great to have Tim here. Look, good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for turning out for tonight's event. I always try to say to people, the public sector is much more exciting than you think. Right? Federalism, politics and policy are really very exciting, right? We say that to the students, not as boring as you might think. And it's clear that lots of you recognise that and the promise and potential of open data to transform the delivery of public services and also in the service of good government. And I think that's something that I'm very passionate about. In fact, some of you might have read the piece that Linda O'Brien wrote on open data that was part of the Dear Premier series that we published on Griffith University's Machinery of Government blog. My job's not to reprise that tonight, it's to really set the context for why this matters, why governments everywhere all over the world at all levels are focused on the promise and potential of information and data to drive productivity and performance improvement in the delivery of public services and to catalyse innovation and the creation of knowledge-intensive jobs and industries. And of course, that's something we can talk about at length, I think, in the Q&A session, hopefully, about how well Queensland's placed for these kinds of things in the context of our budget delivered this week. So briefly summarise why are governments interested in this stuff? Well, there's recognition that our economy and society faces profound disruptive challenges to current models of doing business, of governing and policy making, and particularly how we maintain cohesion, I think, and inclusion against the backdrop of rapid and discontinuous change. And if people haven't seen it, can I really recommend to you a speech that the President of the Business Council, Catherine Livingstone, gave to the National Press Club recently, in which she just gave a fantastic overview, I think, one that I could do no justice to in the short time that I've got. Really sort of looking at the ways in which these disruptive challenges are affecting the way we think about virtually everything, the future of work, the way we live, and so on. So in an environment of fiscal constraint, low growth and declining revenues, governments confront two competing and maybe even conflicting imperatives, and where data kind of can come into bear. These are first to improve the quality of effectiveness of public services while recognising that a more demanding citizenry judges governments on results rather than offering rusted-on support to one or other of the political parties. And you only have to look at the recent experience of Australian politics to know that rusted-onness is completely over, even if you hold a great big whopping majority. From one term to the next, it can change a lot, and not just in this state. So there's a democratic as well as a fiscal and economic imperative to consider how and in what ways the innovations made possible, or maybe even inevitable by technological change, can be enabled by government, which holds, as we know, some of the most reliable, trusted and valuable data. I think it's maybe because we were insulated from the worst ravages of the global financial crisis that Australian governments have been a bit slow on the uptake. And that's that debate, isn't it, about Australia always handles adversity much better than it does prosperity. And so I think we're only now starting to understand how data can be harnessed to deliver more responsive and effective public services to those who need them. And to do that in ways that are relevant to citizens. And the democratic relevance argument of public service delivery is one that I don't think has been explored enough. Citizens are voters as well as clients, and they are very quick to make judgments about a government's capacity on the basis of the provision of services. I think it's often misunderstood how bipartisan a project transforming public service delivery really is. And it's easy to sort of focus on the things that in the rhetoric and emphasis of Labor and coalition governments might differ. But it seems to me, and if you want some evidence of this, I'm always happy to provide it. But if you want some evidence, the speech that Luke Foley, the leader of the opposition in New South Wales recently, the RAND lecture that he gave recently sort of underscores this, the way that Labor in New South Wales is thinking about public service delivery. They've actually got a lot more in common than you'd realise, basically because the imperatives are such, and particularly, I only talk about federalism on a Saturday, so we can talk about it in Q&A. So my own interest in data as a driver of innovation and performance improvement derives from some work I did for the Committee of Economic Development Australia's Political and Economic Overview in 2014. I was commissioned to write a chapter on government productivity, recognising what an important part of the public sector plays in Australia's GDP, and the governance and policy settings affect productivity in the broader economy. That's particularly the case in Queensland. A very big part of the government. This is a public sector economy in many ways and has been since 1859. But I was struck by some of the dilemmas that will have to be confronted as we think about strategies to lift or improve the productivity of government, whatever that might mean. But you'll be relieved to know that I'll spare you my treatise on the dilemmas of measuring or enhancing government productivity, and instead just point out that when we talk about the productivity of government, it really embraces both policy and regulatory frameworks set by government and their impact on business and compliance and other things that can happen, and then government's own role in and approach to the provision of services. Let's just say that I concur with the economist Ross Garnaut that really what we're talking about when we talk about productivity and effectiveness is about outcomes. And what we achieve from the investment of public funds. And in this, I'm really on the same page, and this illustrates the kind of the bipartisan nature of this agenda, as New Zealand's John Key and Bill English, and a growing number of analysts and commentators who argue that we should be focusing on policy as investment. And I think that behoves us then to consider the ways that technology and data can be harnessed to achieve innovation, adaptation, and diffusion of improvements that deliver opportunities for people to participate and to experience security and well-being for themselves and their families. And I think to myself, that's the motivation for what drives most of us who are interested in the public sector and public policy delivery to get out of bed in the morning when it's really cold. And I can see a few of my graduates in the classroom, and I know that what is in the room, and I know that's what drives them. Now, we know from research that 7 sectors of the global economy are expected to benefit immediately from open data. And Linda and Mike will talk in much more detail about this. These are education, transport, consumer products, electricity, oil and gas, healthcare and consumer finance. So by my accounting, 5 of those sectors are primarily controlled by state and territory governments. So open data is of critical importance in Queensland, and particularly because our large service systems remain concentrated in government ownership and control. Now, of course, systems of provision in most of those areas of service delivery are and always have been mixed. The largest, health, education and transport, comprise complex and interdependent networks of private, public and not-for-profit providers. So a key issue and a key opportunity is how do we share data within those systems to enhance the quality and relevance of services for people across the supply chain. And a related issue, I guess, and one that's important to me as a public administration scholar, is how we use data to address the consequences, both intended and unintended, that can flow from disruption or change in one part of a service system and flow across to others. How do we use data to make sure that when we do something, the flow-on effects are what we intend and not what we don't intend? It's perhaps an especially Australian trait, but most Australian citizens aren't interested in the details of complex delivery chains. They just, when things go wrong, as inevitably they do when you're delivering services, and Mike, that never happens in Queensland Transport, I know, but Mike might reflect on this as well. They blame government even when those services have been contracted out or organised in different ways. So there are kind of democratic accountability and performance reasons why governments and the public sector in particular is a fruitful place to look at open data. Linda and Mike are, of course, much more directly involved and can give you lots of useful examples. I want to conclude by just inviting you to consider the opportunities, but also the responsibility I think that we all have for thinking about how innovation and better outcomes can be achieved in our own organisations. I'm a sceptic of many things, but particularly of large high-level reform blueprints initiated from the centre, focused on the system level. They're hard to achieve and even harder politically to sustain. Once the attention of the leader gets taken over by one damn thing after another, it's very hard to maintain the effort. So my own research on public sector reform and my own experience, frankly, suggests that really micro-level reforms pursued at the enterprise level have the greatest potential to yield improvements in service quality and effectiveness than efforts at large-scale system reforms that are complex, they're fraught with lots of risks and implementation failures. So in 2012, my favourite Reserve Bank Governor, Glenn Stevens, described productivity as a test of adaptability, every day doing 1,000 things better than we did yesterday. And I think in the public sector, productivity improvements, more effective and responsive and relevant services are likely to flow when innovation is unleashed, when the energy and knowledge and networks of local providers to improve services are respected. Those people are the best placed to know what's going on, which is why I'm both a federalist and a believer in the devolution of services, a concept known as subsidiarity, because really those people are the ones who know the little micro-level improvements that are going to yield big differences, and data at the local level enables them to see that, and the centre of government can then aggregate that, showcase and disseminate it. So I favour the approach that we're taking tonight, really, explaining, highlighting, showcasing the potential and opportunity for open data to drive better outcomes for Queensland and for Australia, empowering professionals and creating environments that support their ideas and expertise. That's an idea that went missing in public sector reform for about 40 years, but I'm pleased to see that it's coming back. And I think too there's a job for treasuries to do to provide incentives, and I guess, you know, the centre of organisations, to provide incentives by giving people a stake in the value that they create using these kinds of approaches, of the benefits, the efficiencies, the better results, and perhaps even to reinvest in more value creation instead of just the dead hand sucking it back into central revenue, or in our case, the Chancellery. So open data offers those opportunities. I think it's up to each and every one of us to embrace it in the service of our clients, our businesses and communities. And Tim, I hope I was on time.
I think you're under and going beautifully.
So I'll conclude there and let the experts talk.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was absolutely fascinating, of course. Good to hear you talking about your scepticism, and I'm going to ask you a little later what you need to see to convert you, to take you out of that sceptical mindset of yours. I'm interested in that. Now, hopefully you already know Linda from her introduction. Linda, of course, is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Information Services here at Griffith, and Anne's already indicated what Linda will be talking about. Linda will create an excellent bridge from what Anne has put forward to the more practical rather than theoretical exercise that Anne had. So would you please welcome again Linda, if you would.
So we all prepared separately. We did have a chat to each other, so no pressure, perfect bridge. It's really interesting. My master's degree is in public sector management, so Anne and I have no trouble finding some common ground about things we're passionate about. But I started out my life as a teacher and then a librarian, and it's I think entirely appropriate that we're talking about open data at a Friends of the Library event, because librarians, at their heart, you know, one of the oldest professions that are around, were really committed to open access, to making the knowledge of the world findable and curated so that it could be shared for future generations. And I think that passion continues in me and has drawn me into this conversation around open data. It's been very much about how we can support learning, how we can support knowledge creation, and people's understanding of the world so they can help create a better future. As a young librarian, though, I remember somebody showing me this thing called the internet. It was in the late 80s. I got immensely excited. Had difficulty convincing my Vice-Chancellor why it was so exciting, because we had old command line prompts at that stage and he couldn't quite see the potential. But for me, I just thought this provides this amazing opportunity to get information out there, to get it found, to get it applied and used. So I was very rapidly drawn into the world of IT. And in my time in universities, I've seen IT from being just a tool that automates a process, lending out a book, I remember well, with punch cards, through to something that actually can genuinely transform what we do. There's whole new ways now of knowing, of understanding our world based on what's now available. And what is now the library is something that's quite interconnected, quite global. It's both open and closed, creating some amazing opportunities, but also some emergent threats about what that future might look like. It's pretty sobering when you read the stats. It says 90% of the data currently in existence today was created in the last 2 years. So we're just going through this amazing shift, and you will have heard, many people, including colleagues like David, who's here in the audience, talk about the Internet of Things. That's only going to escalate at an even greater pace as we create yet more and more data that we need to turn into something that's valuable. But what it's doing is completely changing the way we need to think about much of what we do. If I look at it through the world of research, it's quite interesting because what we're seeing now is a complete reconceptualisation of how you think about going about your research. Once upon a time, you would create your hypothesis, you would go and collect your data, and then you would analyse it. Increasingly now, there is more data than we know what to do with, and in fact it's about mining and managing and looking for patterns in that data rather than necessarily going out to collect. And in fact, talking to a friend who's a professor in economics, soon to retire, he said when he started that half the professors were theoretical economists. Their theories and basically there aren't too many theoretical economists around because in fact what the data now shows is that in fact the way the economy works is quite different. Australia depends on this science and this research to increase our productivity, to achieve sustainable economic growth, to create jobs, to improve our national well-being. As our Australian Chief Scientist noted, data underpins our aspirations for research, and so it underpins our aspirations for Australia. And across every field of knowledge, we're seeing this shift, this change, unimaginable quantities of data, enormous opportunities. How will we build smart cities without better understanding of traffic flows? How we manage our environment without the data to understand. And now all of those things are real and possible. And it's really pleasing to see how well positioned we are from a research data perspective globally. For those in the higher education sector, we're more acutely aware of that, but we've had sustained national investment in research infrastructure and capability, and I know Tom Cochrane's in the audience. He's just reviewed that strategy at a national level, and hopefully we'll see more funding flow. But what it's allowed us to do is really build our capability around research data management, and we're acknowledged globally for the work we're doing there. A recent study shows that by sharing and reuse of the research data we're collecting out of publicly funded research, we can boost Australia's research output by between $1.4 and $4.9 billion, not to be sneezed at. Amazing opportunities there for relatively modest investments in policy and infrastructure. But what disappoints me is that we're not seeing this cross-connection from that world of research into the world of government data as well as we might. We could do so much more, and I think that's what I'm really keen to see is how we join those forces and that capability in new ways. New South Wales held an open government data think tank recently, earlier this year, to shape what it was doing. And it was interesting to note that the universities were absent. So again, we're seeing this lack of appreciation of those cross-sectoral opportunities. And I think we can do better in Queensland. We need that coordinated approach across government, across industry, across universities, and Anne-Marie's alluded to this already, that these problems now that we have are multi-pronged and we need to be working across all those domains. But governments, more than most, are sitting on this abundant resource called data, a resource that actually gets better the more you share it, the more you expose it, the more you do with it. It's something that yields greater benefits. UK began their open data journey back in 2009, and in that same year, Obama, first day in office, signed a declaration to say all government data will be open unless there's a security or privacy issue associated with it. So big pushes globally in this space to see what can be done. And many projects and examples already of that crossover. A nice one from the UK government where by making housing data open, a homeless shelter could see value in mining that data to improve their business processes. They created a shelter data bank that saved them a day a week, increased their productivity, and then they suddenly realised if they actually made that data open in that structured way, there was a benefit to the broader society in general. And now that data is routinely used by journalists, by academics, by town planners, by the public generally, and by government, so they're getting value back. New Zealand, looking at a lot of work to protect vulnerable children by better predictive risk modelling by sharing data. So it's not just the fully open, but it's what McKinsey talks about, liquid data. How do we build these bridges across and bring these data sets together to yield value? Again, New Zealand putting a lot in the housing reform area. They can see opportunities by exposing data to bring private and not-for-profit sectors in who are asking a lot of questions about the way the world is. By exposing that data, they can create new business models, new ways of working, enhance what they do. A UK study found that the government in the UK alone could save $6 billion a year by just better sharing of the data they had about their citizens across the departments. $6 billion. I mean, again, non-trivial. Even if you only achieved 20% of that, you'd be happy, wouldn't you? US study, 500 examples of companies that have been created out of making data open. I suspect I'm talking to the converted, but I think that the figures are fascinating. A McKinsey Global Institute study, they actually looked across these 7 sectors that Anne-Marie referred to. They believe we can unlock $3 trillion in value annually by making data more fluid, more open. Again, phenomenal numbers. So even if we could only do a percentage of that, we'd see much better opportunities. Being open itself, though, is not necessary or sufficient. It really is about describing the data you have, storing it appropriately in appropriate formats, making clear its conditions of use. In fact, we can enhance privacy and security if we do this well. It's not a risk, it's actually a benefit by doing this well and making this a resource that can be used and applied. So how are we going in Queensland? What's my take on our scorecard? I think we've got an awful lot of advantages in Queensland that we could leverage if we do it well. As I previously mentioned, we're well established nationally in terms of research data management, and arguably the Queensland Loan, Queensland Cyber Infrastructure Foundation, which provides that research capability, is well positioned. It's already doing quite a bit of work with state government, bringing the universities together around opportunities for innovation. More can be done. 2 of the 4 universities in Australia that are regarded as leaders in this area are in Queensland. We've got a fledgling, I think arguably still fledgling, opendata.gov domain in Queensland, but we're seeing lots of interest from across government agencies, some very local active very active local government authorities who are very keen to push in this domain. And in some cases, it's more than just sparks, and you'll hear a bit about that in the case of TMR. Our state libraries involved in discussions globally around digital preservation, and our archives are in the midst of preparing a digital archiving strategy. Also, we're the home of the first Australian Open Data Institute. You'll see the banner over there, and a couple of our board members are in the audience, I've noticed, and our CEO will join us later. It's bringing business and industry and universities together to work in partnership with government to really build that open data culture in Queensland and catalyse open data for the benefit of all Queenslanders. So again, that uniquely positions us to have that agency in place that can work with those stakeholders to deliver outcomes. And finally, we've got a state that is committed to innovation, is committed to productivity and creating the jobs of the future, and to advancing our services, particularly health, education and transport, where there's already clear and indisputable evidence of the value of making data open as to how you can enhance those initiatives. Anne-Marie mentioned the chapter she'd done on productivity, and one of the things she talks about is the opportunity the challenge, opportunity for government to imagine the service systems that unleash that potential for innovation and harness the energy, knowledge and networks of local providers. Open data is exactly in that space. This is where you want all the players together, joining hands to see how we can create a better future for Queensland. I think we're really well positioned to unleash that potential and innovation. I think what's missing, not necessarily the big top-down blueprint, but certainly a clear sense of direction and strategy that brings all those players together for mutual benefit to see how we can unlock the potential of the data that we're all collecting and managing, and to create that vibrant, open data ecosystem. So I'd encourage all of us to think about how we might add weight to that mission and how we might create that bold strategy for Queensland that will make a really positive difference for the state. Thank you.
Open data ecosystem. I like it. We're going to come back to that for sure. I like it. It's good. All right. So, your chance very soon to be part of the conversation. But first of all, Mike Stapleton. Now, the short form of Mike is that he is the Deputy Director General, Infrastructure Management and Delivery, Department of Transport and Main Roads. But the longer story is that he was in charge of the personalised number plates program, which I think is something he'll be talking about quite a lot. And I'd like to know the postcodes where there's the biggest uptake on those, whether it's somewhere down around Burleigh or perhaps somewhere like that, or maybe if it's over at Hamilton. I wouldn't actually. But, so Mike is responsible for 3 branches collectively managing the statewide transport infrastructure, asset management and corridor operations to deliver safe, efficient and integrated transport outcomes for Queenslanders. 3,000 staff, 6 geographical regions, and it also involves the delivery of Queensland Road Investment Program, or QTRIP, valued at $18 billion over the next 4 years. I think Curtis Pitt's first budget was $49.9 billion, is that right? So that'll give you some sense of exactly how large a chunk of where Queensland's dollars are being spent Mike's mob has. But he's also got some interesting background on, if you're looking at car ads, you see ANCAP, the Australasian New Car Assessment Program. He's been a member of the board for that. Also the National Road Safety Strategy, Austroads and Queensland Level Crossing Safety Group. Now the thing is, the sort of data that both Anne and Linda in particular in fact have been talking about is kind of what Mike's been putting into play already, and that nexus where privacy concerns, not so much security, as President Obama was talking about, is an interesting thing for Mike, particularly if you're here and slightly worried that you'll need a tinfoil hat on the train on the way home with all the open data that's out there. So please welcome Mike Stapleton, and then we'll all have a bit of a confab afterwards. Mike, please make him welcome. I've warmed them up for you, Mike.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. And it was a bit of a surprise to hear about the PPQ angle. That was 1998 to 2000. We did use a lot of data there to actually build that business. But I was on the board of that organisation for a fair few years after. So, number plates, and I'll give you an idea on the postcodes later on. But
Good.
I understand they have changed. They have changed. We used advertising to change perceptions of people on that one. But again, it was based on data. So look, thank you for the opportunity to actually come today and actually talk to you about data. It's something that's close, near and dear to my heart. I've been a fairly avid user of the transport data over the last 20 years. Seeing it now being available on the open portal, it's really good because I think people can now see what we have. There are numerous opportunities for developing different ways of doing business. And the truth is that when you leave it just to public servants, you may not get the best outcomes all the time. So I see some really good opportunities building. We are a data-rich organisation. We hold significant amounts of data around the road network, public transport services, and also you, both as individuals and as users of the transport services. You probably are aware of that. We know all your licensing data, we know all your demerit points. So there's plenty of information in there which we hold and which we actually are very careful with because we're a very privacy-aware organisation, which does present its challenges when you start talking about open data. We have used it in a variety of ways. We use it very actively in the planning of the transport network, be it road, rail or maritime. We use it to assist in developing policy in how we manage the transport system and its users. We use it to inform users about the best travel options, and one of the things I'll share with you today is that there's real data out there live every day that can help you make a decision about whether it's worthwhile catching a train or driving to work. It's there right now. We also use it to help us better manage our services that we deliver to you as a customer, and I'll talk about all of those things in the next 10 minutes or so. Transport is one of the areas of the economy where we continue to achieve significant productivity gains. And one of the tools that we're using to do that at the moment is data. The area's road network, we draw on significant amounts of data to help us make decisions about where we invest dollars for the construction and maintenance of the road network. If you ever wondered, the Queensland road network has a book value, and I have a master's in accounting, so this is why it's so valuable to me. $68 billion is the book value. A replacement value is $72 billion, and that lines up pretty close to the state debt at the moment, I believe, so it's significant. We store data, in addition to the GIS data, of which we have quite a significant volume, we also store data on what the road is built out of, construction materials, age, condition. We also have data on traffic volumes, travel times, and road crashes. So there's a significant background of data there that we use. We draw on much of that data in making decisions about where we invest our dollars in relation to, be it building of new pieces of road. We have a fairly mature network now, so a lot of our work does concentrate on how we rehabilitate and maintain the road network. Much of the data we have is not in a form suitable for public use due to it being stored in linear reference, and we have, however, made some progress in sharing that data. For instance, road centreline data sets, which is a spatial GIS data released through the Queensland Government Information Service, is used by commercial providers of navigational systems, which wouldn't be a surprise to you. I make a mention of the Queensland Globe. If you are looking to explore our GIS data, Queensland Globe is an excellent way of doing that. There are significant data sets available, and at different times in a working capacity, I've had reasons to use it, and had some interesting conversation with trucking companies about, look, they say, where are the crashes happening on our network, and we're able to bring up the Queensland Globe and actually show them. And when they start digging into it, they realise they can replan their trucking routes by looking at avoiding the areas where crashes are happening. So we've seen some really good practical applications of that data. Traffic data, we collect and make available information feeds on traffic and road condition information, plus web camera imagery by the Queensland Open Data Portal. These information feeds are used by other government agencies, including local government, industry bodies such as the RACQ and various third-party commercial providers. TMR itself makes information available through the 131940 service. These providers in turn make this information available to other organisations such as Google, who provide real-time travel information through their mapping programs. So if you're like me, if I'm driving, I get up in the morning, I get Google up, have a look and see how long it's going to take me to get to work, because that time actually changes each day on Google for me. I have a 35-kilometre trip, and it can be anything from an hour 10 to about 40 minutes, depending on traffic conditions. And the reason Google knows that is because Tim will talk about that terrible thing called a mobile phone. If you actually use that hooked in with Bluetooth, we're able to monitor how long it takes you to get from home to work in about 100 metre segments. And we combine all that data, and we're able to tell in real time via Google how long it's going to take you to get to work, or how long it took the last person or the range of people that travel that route, how long it took to get to work. Now, I wouldn't say it works perfect every time, but I reckon about 80% of the time it's pretty close to accurate. So that's information that's out there readily available now, costs you nothing, and it gives you travel time. We constantly review our position on low-level traffic system control information, as it does require a lot of effort in providing it openly. And previously we were the only source of this data. As I mentioned, now today there are quite a number of sources. TransLink data. We are in the process of making real travel time data available to the public via a TransLink app, which is available on iPhones and smartphones. This has the potential to provide public with information that can influence change their daily travel decisions. So those of you that have downloaded the TransLink app would probably notice it does more today than just give you the timetables. It's actually starting to tell you how long it is before that bus turns up, and it's not long now that you'll be getting the same type of information in relation to trains. So you'll see that open data is actually sourcing through and making a big difference every day about how people make decisions. Near and dear to my heart, policy development. We have significant stores of data around vehicle registration, driver licensing and road crashes. And look, I'll actually take a little bit of time talking about this because I've probably spent the best part of the last 10 years as General Manager in charge for registration, licensing and also road safety, rail safety. And we have used all that data to help us better understand policy, or actually policy positions. For the past 20 years, we have de-identified data in relation to all those, and I use the word de-identified because we can't share your personal information, but we do take subsets of the data which don't reveal anyone's identity and share that with local authorities, RACQ and universities. TMR has made extensive use of the data in the area of policy development as it pertains to road user management and more particularly road safety. Why is it important? Quite simply, how can you develop policy if you don't understand the problem? And data is critical in understanding the problem. It gives us capacity to isolate and investigate subgroups and help us to target possible interventions. You see the road toll, you can look at it in a broad sense, but if you can actually break it down and start looking at it within subgroups, you can actually start developing interventions, and that's the way we've used it. Many of the interventions have themselves been the result of deeper investigation of data here and overseas undertaken by specialist researchers based in universities. And good examples of that would be the graduated licensing system we've introduced for learner drivers, P-platers, during the last decade, which was based very heavily on deep data analysis and also research work that was done coming out of that. More recent example for us was roadside drug testing, again where we did a fair bit of deep research to come up with policy positions. Again, in conjunction with universities. Just turn the attention now away from there and move on to open data on service delivery. Transport Main Roads doesn't have a great history when it comes to service delivery when you look back over the years. My colleague, Dr. Graham Frayne, has actually spent a fair bit of time over the recent years actually changing that, turning that around, and I'm happy to say that he's experienced a lot of success. We used to have, I'm thinking back now, I think if you rang Transport Main Roads when I probably started working in that area about the turn of the century, it was something like 20 to 40 minutes for a response on the telephone. It's more like 4 to 5 minutes, so things have improved in that space. And the way we've improved it is actually through data and actually looking at our own internal data. Data sets such as customer service centre wait times, demand for driving tests and vehicle inspections are used by us right now to help us actually shift resources to meet business demand. Again, they are all data sets that are actually openly available, so they are out there and available. Performance metrics such as serving time, idle time, accuracy rates are all captured daily and provided to frontline managers so they can actually view how the business is performing and make adjustments. So we are using the data very much to help us drive the business to be a better business. Understanding our customers, one of the more innovative things we've been doing of late that we're actually expecting we'll get a lot of benefit from is using our customer data to develop a range of customer insights and using these insights to help us shape future products, services, new delivery channels and to ensure our services meet customer expectations. This has included customer segmentation, using openly available census data. At the moment we're doing this, combined with internal data to develop a range of distinct customer segments, which allows us the opportunity to look at our customers in different ways. We use spatial data, so this is different again to our roads data. We use things such as address codes that Tim mentioned before to help us actually map that against population growth, internet uptake and motor vehicle ownership to help us determine where to build new customer service centres and the types of services we may want to offer around those services. So look, heading forward, and I'm conscious of time and it's probably better that we get into some discussion, what are some of the issues we are thinking about heading into the future? For us, we have the challenge that the format of our data and consequently its suitability for sharing is a clear challenge for our organisation. Some of the older data we have, and I can say this confidently, particularly in the roads area where we've actually been collecting it for many decades, is really not that suitable for sharing, but we're working pretty hard to actually get into shape to be shared. Coming around the corner, we are very, very aware of the vehicle automation that is going on at the moment with manufacturers, and we believe this will drive a greater desire for detailed traffic system information. So cars, to operate in the future, will demand better, more accurate information. We've all heard the talk about the driverless car. That just won't happen without good quality data. Having been on the board of ANCAP for the past decade, I can assure you I've spoken to many vehicle manufacturers and they don't agree on anything. Would be the way what I'd say, their car is the best, but they're all going to need the data. Into the future, we have an interest in working with service delivery partners rather than just being a supplier of data, so we can see that if we're going to get the outcomes we want, we need to work more collaboratively with others. And at this point, I think we might hand over to Tim and let the, I suppose, the game start.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Excellent stuff. It's been such an interesting set of presentations. And this is your chance to be part of the conversation as well. There's security here, so please don't be alarmed. The microphones are just up here with our cinematographer friend. So if you have a question or if you have a comment to make, if you want to be part of the conversation, do please put your hand up and we will get to you with a microphone. I'll just ask, just so I get a sense, and perhaps everyone else gets a sense, of where you're coming from and what your background might be, what your expertise might be. I will ask that you just tell me who you are. And it's, I guess that's a form of open data in itself. So just if you put your hand up, you can be first, and everyone, someone always... See, I wish I was Oprah and I could say there was a car under your seat, my friend. I can't. If there is a car under your seat, it's very small and I didn't put it there. So thank you for being first. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, hi. My name's Neil Makepeace. I'm one of the directors of Open Data Institute Queensland. So to own up, I've got some form in this space. Thanks very much for the comments that you all made. Obviously, I know Linda extremely well. I've now owned up to that as well, but I enjoyed all of it. My question is really for you, though, Anne. You were talking, and I fought through autocorrect to make a few notes. And you were talking about participation, and I wrote down empowerment. I'm not quite sure if you said that.
I hope so.
And it connected with something I believe in quite strongly, which is making open data sort of meaningful to people. And then Linda, a little bit later on, gave us some big numbers, benefits of open data. Yeah. My question concerns the regions, because I think that if it is true that open data is a lever for empowerment, participation and advancement, maybe of the less fortunate members of society in the less fortunate regions of our state, then we ought to be able to create an effect. And yet, in terms of the public sector, I think it's local government, and I think in particular it's local councils that are not like Brisbane City Council, large, wealthy, interested in this, capable, but actually the smaller ones who look after those citizens in the regions who've got the biggest challenges. So with that long preamble, forgive me, I'm just interested in your perspective about governmentally or otherwise, how we make this real and how we extend some of these benefits to people who live in the regions. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. That's a big long question, but I am not a sceptic about this. I think we make those changes by demonstrating the return on investment. And this idea of policy as investment is one that you'd think, it's so obvious really, isn't it? It's like the cat flap that we talk about in the course that I teach. It's so obvious, such a great idea. Why didn't, somebody think of it before? But it's a genius thing when somebody invents it. But, the New Zealand government are moving very innovatively. They've re-engineered their entire budget process. People always say, oh, you can't redevelop the budget. Well, yes, you can actually. And Bill English and John Key have demonstrated that they've done that. They've done it primarily in the social services, and they're re-engineering investments in interventions, in participation, particularly in early childhood, school readiness, some of these kinds of things for the most vulnerable, because they've calculated, drawing on some research from a Nobel Prize-winning economist, James Heckman, that the return on investment in early childhood is $7 for every one you invest. And the people who never become a problem for you because you've enabled them to participate and to achieve their potential as we want for everybody. So if a Conservative government in New Zealand, one of the most trade exposed, they are a bit reform excitable, that's good. It's got nothing to do with federalism, it's all about attitude and trade exposure. I think return on investment, policy is investment, and the results, and explaining those results and demonstrating those results. Because if I'm the mayor of the South Burnett and I've got no money and the state government's got no money because the Commonwealth government's taking money away and I've got escalating costs and revenue going off a cliff, then there's a compelling argument for doing those sorts of things. So I think that's our challenge. As sort of, public intellectuals and people interested in this kind of stuff, is how do we make that argument? How do we have people go, my God, $7 for every one investment in early childhood, or, these amazing productivity gains for businesses that can be brought out of data? I think that's how we do it.
It's just another thing New Zealand's doing better than we are. It is.
I think it's generational. I have several theories about that we can talk about.
I'm just curious from the three, and please put your hand up and I'll get to you for a question in a moment, but a question for the three of you. How does an institution like yours prioritise its financial investment in assessing and analysing data? And Mike, you talked about deep data.
Yeah.
How do you know where to allocate the resources, the human resources, as much as anything you have to get to the data and make use of the data that's available?
Yeah, look, and that's a good question itself. I suppose for us, and I'll talk in terms of the work that I did mainly in the road safety space with quite a number of other people. For us, we were always able to turn the road toll and the serious injury levels into dollars. There's a known formula. A fatality is worth a certain amount. Don't want to get into an argument about that, so I won't mention it, as is a serious injury. And when you start talking in terms of if we can make reductions, we will return these dollars to the economy, all of a sudden it becomes an easy decision. So I've been involved in that area since when I came on board, I think the road toll was sitting at 360. Today it's sitting at 224 last year, 23 last year. So you can actually quantify the improvement. You can measure it, and their benefits, an accepted model, accepted numbers, and their measurable dollar benefits for the economy. So it's easy under those circumstances to actually get money allocated to do the work.
Does the same thing apply to institutions like universities, Linda?
Well, once you get into the realms of research, it gets quite interesting. And when you look at the analyses that McKinsey and others have done, there are a whole lot of benefits that are quite hard to quantify. I mean, even the fact that investment in early childhood yields benefits down the track, they're often quite hard to quantify. And in research, we can point to many examples where data's been collected for a particular purpose. I can think of one in my past university. It was ethnographic data from the South Pacific Islands. Over many years, they digitised these frail recordings and other things and actually were able to tell the story of ethnographic people throughout the region. And someone in population health started looking at this data and suddenly realised they could look at the spread of disease throughout the region and how, and there was a whole lot of new learning. Now, when the data was collected, that wasn't what it was for. When it was stored and preserved and made accessible, that wasn't what it was for, and yet this new knowledge has come from that. So it's much more complex in that research space, and I think that's true. It translates into the open government data space as well, because I think it's not until some of this information's exposed and people start to correlate that with other information that they'll suddenly see this amazing insight that was not visible. And I guess this is where fantastic what TMR's doing, but we need to join up the silos, because that's where the real value is going to come. So it's, there is a bit of a leap of faith in saying this is a good thing to do. There is also the case, I spoke to a senior federal bureaucrat in the open data space who told me, where was that open data millionaire? Why should I bother doing more of this? I can't, show me the open data millionaire. It's not that simple. And I guess, I'd encourage you to read Anne's piece on productivity because the reality is there are many benefits, some of which are easier to put dollar values on than others. But it's about the overall health and well-being of our society.
Okay, now does someone else have a question? Because I've got so we could be here till 10 tonight, but then you'll miss Glitch, which was really great last week and I hope you saw it. So who else got a question? Excellent. So we can get a mic over here in the middle, over at the back there as well. That would be great. But I'm going to come back to the commodification of it and where perhaps not a faculty like this one, but other faculties at universities might want to be a little protective of the work they're doing on open data because there could be dollar signs attached. So we'll come to that. Yes, hello.
Thank you. I attended
Sorry, would you mind just telling us who you are and perhaps your credit card number?
From Queensland State Archives. I attended a talk by Michael Roseman from QUT the other day, and he, in passing, mentioned that an important emerging occupation is data economists, which is people who can analyse, understand, quantify the economic value of data. And as an archivist, where we deal with big data routinely, but making hard decisions about what to keep and what to get rid of, I thought, these could be very useful people. So I asked him, where could I find these data economists? And he said, well, unfortunately, they don't actually exist yet, but they'll be really important in the future. So I guess my question perhaps to the universities is, do you have plans to train such people?
I was just going to say the theoretical economist baby boomers are still sitting in their chairs, so we haven't been able to replace them. Oh, sorry.
So it's a good question, though.
It's a great question. It's one that comes up all the time, right? About where's the pipeline of skills and expertise? Because there's the technical analysis, I think, and this is much more your domain than mine. But to me, it's the insight and the sense making that is, and that's why I think the frontline people. So you need people to do that stuff, and it's really important, and we need to be growing them, and Griffith needs to grow them. Lord knows. But, I do think we should, and that's why I'm kind of always come back to the front line, the knowledge and wisdom that's in delivery systems that we have, because I just don't think that, just straight analysts are going to give you insight, sense-making, experience, judgment, all those things that actually would really make a difference, with no disrespect to
and there's
data as opposed to theoretical economists.
Well, one of the emergent demands, there's lots of demands in the GIS sector around modelling and mapping. But the whole visualisation. If you think about the volume of what we're dealing with, that ability to take that volume and turn it into models that make sense to people so they can understand and interpret. So there is a whole a whole suite of capabilities and skills, some of which we're starting to grow, hence my reference back to research data. We are starting to grow those within Australia. Unfortunately, they're on soft money and they're highly attractive globally. So, I'm sure any of us in universities can point to colleagues that have been snaffled up by institutions overseas. So we do need to start to try and protect that pipeline and grow that talent.
And that's an issue in government too. There's been a lot of, snaffling of people, even from, the UK and New Zealand, the private and public sector sort of movement, and that can bring its own challenges.
So this could be the growth industry data. I've never heard that expression before. It makes perfect sense, particularly when I always thought the big growth industry would be tattoo removal. But obviously data economists could be the one. Who had the next question, please? Pop your hand up. Over at the back there, over at the side here. Good evening.
Hi. My name's Beth. I work in the Office of the Queensland Chief Scientist. I've got a question for Mike. You mentioned a lot of stakeholders who are involved or who share data.
That's it, you've upset him.
I thought you'd brought slides, my friend.
It's my cue to leave, is it?
It was the mention of the university.
I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us some specific strategies that you use to create that data liquidity that was mentioned earlier. So surely there's a better way than just throwing it up on the internet for someone to stumble across. How do you make sure it's being used meaningfully?
Yeah, I suppose you're getting down into some of the detail that I'm probably not expert on, and there are people here we can connect you with later on who can probably answer it better than me. But we have provided data to a variety of suppliers over a long period of time. So we have made connections. I made mention before. Companies such as Google come in and actually pick up our data and use it. Would I say that we've consciously gone out and thought about what it is that we're going to provide? Probably not a conscious thing. We've like most government agencies, we've waited for people to come to us. We are probably thinking more now about what connections we could make into the future, which is my comment at the end there. We're becoming more aware that we need to get more active in the space of how our data is used and what benefits there might be. I probably despair a little bit because you mentioned data and we all talk about, we think about people using it, and invariably it'll be someone who likes a computer who wants to look at data and just play with it. And a lot of those people are great game players, I'm sure. But for me, I'd like to see, and I've seen this comment made by a few people recently, I'd like to see some of our IT experts linking more with social science skill sets, people with those skill sets, and thinking a bit more broadly about how data might be used. So for me, that's the type of thing I think we need to do. It's very unstructured at the moment, it's a little bit random. Commercial sector comes in and takes an opportunity where they see it, but we're not necessarily thinking about what's going to be the best for the community long term. That's the big danger, and this is a fledgling industry, really.
Sure.
And that's part of the problem. We don't have a lot of experience in it.
So do you think there will be not an imperative, but perhaps a preference from ministers and DepSecs, etc., that if you are supplying data to Google in a very readily consumable form, that Google is a very profitable organisation, that perhaps you would be expected to say to Google, you're welcome to have this even if it's for a relatively small amount, but at least to recoup some of the cost of the provision of that data?
With the Queensland Open Data Policy, it's free, and any organisation can come and get that data, and that's an intentional position taken. There have been, I know that New South Wales will sell some of its data, but in Queensland it's a free commodity, and that's designed to actually open up the economy around open data and make sure there's no barriers to its use. So the pressure's on government agencies to make more available. My concern is, are we connecting with the right partners? Are we actually encouraging the development of that economy? I think that was the question that was really being asked. And for me, I think that's one of the really big challenges.
Yeah, so I guess just to add to that, and I see Marie's arrived up the back. Hi Marie, CEO of Open Data Institute Queensland. One of the things we've tried to do is get those different stakeholders in the room around an issue, around a topic, to see what is out there, how might we think differently. It's early days, we've started around a few themes, but I think if we can find ways to catalyse that conversation, because what I've heard, and I know, well, Neil can speak to this too from his experience in his real job, you often have a local government authority saying, well, we've got all this stuff that we think's really valuable, but we don't know who needs what out there, or how they need it, or how they, so how do we join those conversations up? And I think that's a really important thing to work out, how we actually join up those conversations.
Well, there wind up being a tier perhaps of brokers who, or what have you, who will facilitate knowing what you have available and then making a contact with Neil who might be able to do something with it.
Or how to yield those benefits. So that's true, and a few of us, Marie and I, were on the advisory group of the minister involved in this and all the rest of it. And one thing we've never figured out is how to deliver these benefits for the state. I'm sorry, I shouldn't.
He's loud, he doesn't know.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with what you said, and I think we're still figuring that bit out. There are big numbers, but we don't quite know how to get them.
But also they're long, I guess the evidence also is they're long term, and we're often stuck with short-termist government perspectives.
Yeah, but that's why I made the point about, I think this is actually more bipartisan than the, posturing and performance art, tedious performance art that we're kind of stuck with than you think, I really do think there's a lot more convergence between those views than we might think. And I think, just to go back to your point, Linda, about how Queensland's well positioned, it's so telling that the universities weren't in the room at that New South Wales think tank. And it tells you something about universities in this state as kind of knowledge. I think there's much better relationships. I think the policy elite is more open because the place is small and you have to solve problems. And I think we need to think about how to leverage that in a way.
Could the thinking be different here because, as Graham Quirk, the Lord Mayor, told me a little while ago, the biggest industry in Brisbane is education, and perhaps the thinking here is quite different to what it is across the border.
Yeah, and necessity is the mother of invention. There's nothing like lean to have to innovate.
We've got a big space.
Who's got another question?
So many people.
Gentleman down here, or perhaps the lady there, yes.
Janine Schmidt, user of data. I suppose I worry that all organisations collect vast amounts of data and don't seem to know what to do with it when they've got it, and that we lack skills at a very basic level in understanding and using data appropriately. So given the universities are present, what is the emphasis these days? Literacy has had a lot of press recently, but what about numeracy? And really how to interpret and analyse data in a meaningful way. Just at a quite low level.
Yeah.
Oh
Linda, would you like some of that?
Literacy, a numerous question, please.
I think it's a gap. I think the way many universities are structured, it often falls between the cracks in terms of thinking about how we do that in a more holistic and integrated way. Though it's on people's radars, there is more interest. I'm looking at some of my academic colleagues in the audience, but I'm not sure to what extent we're really thinking about how to embed that, because that data knowledge understanding, it's not just about the specialists, it's about giving everyone in every profession the capability and capacity to operate in a world that's data rich.
But also consumers, a capacity to operate in that world too. In the professional postgrad course that we teach in policy, people are using a lot of evidence and that sort of stuff. I'm not close enough to the undergrad stuff anymore to know how much those literacies are built in.
Yeah.
Who's got another question? Down here, yes.
Hi, I'm Stephen Gates from Transport and Main Roads. A little while ago when we had a different government, there was a proposal around legislation to encourage or require departments to publish data. I'm wondering whether we actually need a right to data law or whether the strategy and platform weaknesses you talked about, Linda, are a better focus.
Do you want me?
This sounds like a public policy
Oh, this is a public policy question.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult for me to answer, Stephen.
So,
Because it's
I'll get him in trouble
a
before
Fifth
we get
Amendment.
don't worry.
It's a Fifth
we
Amendment.
have to turn all the microphones off.
Yeah.
That's it. Legislation is the path-dependent policy instrument of choice in Queensland for reasons I don't know. It just makes me tired, and I wish it would stop. And it is not an achievement getting a whole lot of legislation through the Parliament. It's just that you weren't smart enough to think of another way of doing it, right? So, and putting it in the curriculum is the second laziest policy instrument in. But anyway, that's another debate for another day. I think it's about culture, and I think it's about attitude, and I think it's about what Neil's talking about and Linda are talking about in terms of demonstrating benefits. How do you demonstrate the benefits so that you don't have to compel people, but people actually go, oh my God, I could make that kid's early childhood experience so much better. Or I could, that vulnerable family that's costing $1 million over its life course as it bounces into homelessness and into substance programs or whatever, I could actually be doing something that yields a benefit, and there's something in that for us because it's a values thing, which we didn't talk about at all, the importance of values and some of the choices that you make around these kinds of things, and about what we're here for. So I think, I exaggerate, but I really do think you mandate that stuff, it just starts from, I think we need to start from a strengths-based position, which is, there's something in this for all of us. There's something in this that is so good in terms of innovation and efficiency and productivity and inclusion and all that stuff in a really smart state. You don't need to hit people over the head with it if you make a persuasive case.
Mike, is there a culture where you are and among your confrères where the benefits of making this data available are seen and that the allowing access to it is encouraged?
Look, I suppose speaking from the perspective of the executive leadership team, of which there are 6 of us in Transport Main Roads, we actually are quite excited because we see there's enormous opportunity. We've put data out there and we're really waiting to see what happens, which is probably not the best way to go in some ways. But I think the public service at higher levels is seeing there's an opportunity here. We're not too sure what it is, but if we get the data out there, they will come.
But it is a bit of a brave new world, isn't it?
It's a brave new world, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you were there at the beginning, as you said, although to me you don't look old enough. But
Yeah. No, thank you, Tim.
Yeah, but do you find that data gets out there and you think that there will be a use for it, that someone will take it and run with it, and they don't, and do you then go back to the drawing board and think, oh, okay, well, I didn't quite, that didn't go the way I thought it would go?
Yes, we do think that. We think there's data we're putting out there could be used and probably taken advantage of in different ways for the benefit of the community, and it's not happening. Hence my comment before, I think the right groups of people may not be connecting and looking at what the opportunities are. I think the commercial world's very focused on what they believe will be of value. Can they make $1 out of it? And we're seeing, as I mentioned before, we're seeing the car companies coming down the street and they're going to have a massive demand for data. But again, they've all got their own individual views on what that is. And to give an example, I mean, Volvo have an objective that by 2020 no 2 Volvos will collide. Well, what about the rest of the car fleet? So, that was an interesting discussion I had in Sweden one time. It's these types of things that I point to. They're all going to want it, and they don't necessarily agree on what it is they want and how they're going to get it.
No.
Yeah.
So I guess just to loop back to that and to pick up on an earlier question, there are emergent global standards around the way data should be described and managed and used. The standards always struggle to keep up with what's technically possible, and it's never as funky as that bespoke thing that somebody's just invented. But we need to get people like the car companies thinking about the fact that in fact there's benefit for everyone if they comply to a standard. Easier said than done, but I guess if I look at what's happened in the IT industry, inevitably something falls out of the standard anyway, because people realise that sharing is more valuable than having the one that you think's better than somebody else's.
But I mean, that's another reason why the legislation just couldn't keep up. Even if you did think it was a good way, it's always way out in front of you. You can only ever know in the lag that it's not working, and then you've got the problem of, national consistency and global economies, and do these things even matter anymore, So I think there's some challenges around that.
It's interesting though that I think, Linda, you pointed out that Obama made that statement, pretty much before he'd even danced with Mrs. Obama at the ball.
That's right.
What does that say about the attitude there, where here in Australia with 23 million people, there's a very different state of mind between New South Wales and Queensland, for example? What's happening in the United States where that's the edict from the get-go from Obama, whereas here where Queensland's doing it this way, New South Wales doing it this way, and so it goes?
There's some national coherence. So it did start out as a national initiative, and the state governments are following the same, using the same tools and technologies. And we've adopted the UK philosophy and model by and large in terms of the standards and frameworks we're using. But my sense is we're quite fragmented, and even within Queensland, across different local government authorities and state government departments, it's almost like it's a competition rather than an opportunity for us to collaborate and do clever things together. And I'm not quite sure how we change that culture, because that's the sense, others that have dealt with some of these authorities may feel similarly, but it's almost like, but I've put more data sets out than you have. So, and in fact, it's
show me the return.
So it is how we have a more mature conversation, because I think we've probably set the wrong indicators of success. We need a more nuanced, it's not how many or how much data. So we do need to have that more mature conversation across levels of government. The other thing that New Zealand has the advantage of is it's got fewer levels of government, and that gets in the way here too.
I don't agree with
you. You don't think so?
Creativity of federalism.
I don't know. I think it's been trade exposed, because what was going on in the US when they adopted those things, the Lehman Brothers melted down in 2008. The backside fell out of the economy. I think it's our lack of exposure to the existential threat that makes some of those
try so hard.
Because actually you get innovation, and you can see how everybody else has done it by the time you pick it up, and you don't have to go through the process of a bad idea, as you do when you get just one level of government doing something. So I think there's arguments on both sides, but I don't think it's divorced from the economic and political drivers. So why is it that we're so much better at complacency than and prosperity than the other? But that's changing, as we can see.
And how will that mature conversation about the use of data encompass privacy and security, given the remarkable paradox that we are all so conscious of it and yet put all that crap about our private lives on Facebook, tell the supermarkets all our shopping habits with our frequent shopper cards, and so it goes. We're not worried about that, but other stuff that's probably not quite as vital, we get a bit funny about. So how do we have the conversation but encompass those things, which Australians should, everybody should, be pretty head up about their privacy and security? And how do you think we do that?
You always ask me the hard questions. I don't know. I think a lot of the stuff around privacy, for the most part, you can trust the government for two reasons. One, they're not organised enough to oppress you, right? And the second thing is that we actually do have a contract, we have a social contract between government and citizens. So I think there remains a high level of trust in our delivery systems, notwithstanding the high levels of distrust, cynicism and derision that our politicians are justifiably held in a lot of the time. So I think as custodian, we don't have that much to worry about as long as we've got proper accountability frameworks. What I worry about, Tim, is that within public sector organisations, the privacy stuff becomes a form of resistance to doing something good, and that kind of risk aversion that's often built into these things becomes the dominant thing. I didn't answer your question, but I couldn't. So.
No, and I think too, we were having these conversations around with Gold Coast University Hospital, you know, could we get patients at point of entry to say, I'm happy to have my data made available to support research, tick the box. And a lot of people would say yes and allow that sharing, but unless we ask, it's never going to happen. So, you know, there are ways to start to self-initiate better sharing so that we can enhance our knowledge and understanding. There are a whole lot of issues then to unpack, like when you find that patient that's got that issue that hadn't been diagnosed, but when you do you trace back? So there's lots of stuff. I'm not saying it's not
the fear of litigation.
Straightforward, but I think many people are much more open if they understand how and why that data is going to be used and how it has broader benefit.
And look, it's public service water cooler stuff really. It's, the truth is that prior to privacy laws, that government departments actually shared information between themselves quite openly, and I can remember those days. But after privacy laws, a lot of shutters did come down. One of the big advantages of open data is actually forcing us to think about different ways to share information again. I think that is really important, because privacy laws, as valuable as they are, did reset the whole public service thinking. Few people got burnt early, and all of a sudden, oh my God, too much risk, shut down.
Well, we've got some spectacular examples at the moment in child protection where information's actually not getting across the boundaries in the way that it should.
And I've been in the middle of quite a couple of public service feuds over data and whether or not you can or can't have it. You know, plenty of legal advice on this over the years, and it is a difficult area which I can't speak about.
And there I was wondering how this was going to create jobs for legal types in the public service. Got time for one, maybe two quick questions, if you would like. At the back there, can we get a microphone to you, sir?
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Hi, Craig Barron. I'm an IT contractor. We've just had a conversation about security and privacy. We've also spoken about data quality, and there's been mention in the leaflet about information lifecycle management. They're sort of disciplines that you associate with data governance.
Just keep going.
It's okay, I can hear you.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on the level of maturity of data governance within the state government. And the second part of the question would be, what is happening in the academic institutions to provide skills or any courses on data governance or data management?
Do you want Mike to answer the first part of that question? Me too. Mike, what do you reckon?
It probably comes back to what we were just talking about in that last conversation. The public service, I think, has actually generally gone low risk, avoid, we won't share anything. And that was the initial reaction. Hence, what's happening at the moment is open data's forcing them to rethink the whole issue of data governance, or forcing us to rethink. I'll admit to being a public servant. Rethink the whole data governance issue. You cannot make data available. I mean, I've had the situation where I have been refused data, only to find out it was on an open portal. So, you know, that'll give you some idea of the challenges. There are a lot of people in the public service who are making independent decisions about data access, and it can be a challenge at times.
And just from a university perspective, we're seeing quite a lot of programs emerging in the data science area. Typically that's the label that they go by, both at postgrad and undergrad level. So you're starting to see emergence of those programs throughout universities in Australia. I think, you know, there's a ways to go in terms of helping people understand the significance and importance of these programs and attracting people. I mean, one of the things that I find gobsmacking is that we can't recruit students into IT programs in Australia, yet IT is not going away. But there's just not the appetite or interest, which I find amazing. So we may find the same thing in this domain. Yeah, we're doing something wrong because other countries aren't necessarily seeing that same problem in the way that we are. So there's a lot of interest in how you get that back into the school system. There's a feeling that perhaps it's the disparity in the school system in terms of maths and training in those areas. But it is a big problem for us nationally. We're not growing the talent.
Yeah, and that is a big lag, isn't it, in the system, you know, the vocational
It's a long-term
education and
lag.
guidance that kids are getting. I mean, things are changing so rapidly. I mean, I know how much things have changed. You know, I started out as a teacher like you, Linda, many moons. But, you know, I know how much it's changed in my career in universities and the public sector earlier than that. Yeah. And you just think, how would you as a careers advisor to, you know, coming out of a primarily teaching background in a school, keep up with the rate of change? I mean, there's lots of models that need challenging and maybe aren't working.
Do they still have careers advisors in schools? Really? Wow. When I went to school, I had the same careers advisor that had been my dad's careers advisor. And all through that, he'd been a freaking careers advisor. I mean, what did he know? We've got time for one more question before I ask Anne what it's going to overtake to come her awful poisonous scepticism. So, who's got the last question? Or have I got it? I've got it. Oh, go on. Oh, over the back. Sorry, we've already heard from you. Over the back there in the hoodie.
Hello.
Oh.
Yep. Yes.
David Ansco from Transport and Main Roads Open Data Team.
He can answer your questions.
Don't bother ringing there tomorrow. They're all here tonight. Go ahead.
I guess just tying into something, as Mike rightfully said earlier, we are an incredibly data-rich organisation, and we are, I believe, making some great strides in getting data out there. But as Linda also said, just volume of data sets is not really a good way of measuring success. Just adding a perspective on there, I think there's value, even if some of the data sets we're putting out aren't actually being adopted in the ways that we hoped or being utilised as to the extent that we were envisioning. I think there's value there in a cultural change and a sort of a greasing the groove and learning the practice sense to actually go through the process of having the conversations with our custodians and understanding the value of that data, even if the open data aspects of it in some cases may be a complete byproduct of having that conversation. I guess, just tying in something that somebody else said earlier, is there a better way of people within the public service who are in the business of sharing data to sort of gauge interest for what data would be valuable to people, to academics, to other organisations? Because at the moment we're making some judgment calls based on what we think is the best value data to share, but obviously in some cases we're not necessarily hitting the mark there.
Linda.
Yeah, we do need to find better ways, and I'm open to suggestions. I mean, as I said, ODI, we're trying to pick up on some themes and get the right people in a room together. I'm encouraging some of my folk to go out and talk to academics and see where their burning issues are and say, well, actually, we might be able to link you up. You know, did you know? Because there's not a lot of awareness on, you know, I mean, because it's all moving quite quickly, for many of us, there aren't good levels of understanding about what might be possible. So we constantly have to keep trying to build these bridges. Open to suggestions about things we might do. GovHack's one attempt to try and start to get some interest, but I think the format doesn't necessarily get us where we need to be. So I think there's some opportunity to think about strategies to encourage those conversations that bring the different sectors together, and it may be around a problem, you know, maybe just taking that problem focus.
Can I say two things about that? I sat on the board of the Queensland Public Service Commission for 4 years. My hair has grown back. Can I say what a great generationally different comment that was? Like, so what if people do something with it and do something? I'm thinking, oh, thank God. So that's really good. And the other thing I wanted to say is it's no accident that we invited Mike from TMR to kind of talk and be on the panel tonight, because I think all of us acknowledge that TMR is a real innovator. It just doesn't tell anybody about it. So, you know, when I go and do things in Victoria, I go, how hard can it be to introduce an integrated ticketing system, you people? You know, we did that a long time ago. You know, so I think we need to take, well, you need to showcase a bit more, and I think we need to take your point seriously, Linda. The Queensland's really well placed, and I think lots of us think that's potentially really exciting, not just because, you know, of the state of origin or, you know, coag joke that I'll tell you over drinks, but because it really would be better. It really would be better for citizens, and I think that is what people expect from governments. They don't, there is a democratic deficit, but they still trust service delivery. So that's not a paradox. That's actually the truth, because their encounters with government, people doing service delivery are positive. So how do we, showcase and make sure those things are harnessed in that way?
All right, while you've got the floor, very quickly, you talked about your scepticism. One of the reasons I love having you on the show on Saturdays, about 11:15, if you haven't heard it. Always very
Between
interesting.
consumer talk.
The
and
rose.
the stuff people are really interested in.
The rose between two thorns. Your scepticism, what will it take to overcome the scepticism you mentioned?
Oh, well, my scepticism about big reform blueprints is that they don't stick. They don't stick because they're top-down, they're, initiated. We need to let the 1,000 things that people know how to do better every day work. And grow and give people incentives and respect that, because that's where the knowledge is, The Premier is high and far away, she can't know. The Prime Minister is further away, and their attention gets, overtaken. We sort of, in some research that I do, we sort of talk about the blasts of wild treachery and weirdness that, Anastasia Palaszczuk has to deal with on a daily basis, or Tony Abbott both initiates and kind of, has to respond to on a daily basis. So lots of stuff happens. It can't be driven from the top down. It just can't. And it shouldn't be. So I think, it's in the purview of the kind of the just do it. It's only from my tedious reflections on 40 years of public sector reforms that kind of haven't delivered what people have hoped, but because it was never realistic and didn't stick, and then it accreted and it sedimented, and on and on it went. I've written about this. Let's just give the professionals some space to do the things that they need to do, serving their communities. Let's give them a return, an incentive to do that, so they can reinvest in the things that they know are good, and then we can save a lot of time in Cabinet on a Monday morning, and it'll all be good.
Hallelujah. All right. Can you please thank Linda, Anne and Mike? And are you going to invite people for drinks, or am I doing that?
I'm going to invite people for drinks.
It's your hook, so I'll happily invite people for drinks.
Our friends are welcome to join us for drinks, and thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Great.